WFH with two guys. Now here's Benny and Dennis.
When you start up a company, we have a basic idea and maybe you even have a direction and a game plan of where you want to go. Things that we don't know of. Unless you're an attorney, the legal aspect does come up and it's going to be an important part of your business.
It is. I mean, again, think about driving down the road and there's, white lines or guardrails along the road. Think of the attorney and the accountant and possibly even the HR person as people helping you be those guardrails to kind of stay within the boundaries, because you're always excited about going and getting started, but there's all kinds of rules and regulations and taxes and things you can and can't do that you may not know everything, especially if you're selling across state lines and that kind of thing, because what applies in one state may not apply in another one, or there's all kinds of things that you just need to take into consideration. And there's also risk that's associated with, because people love to sue other people. And so, the key is to have it where you've got protection and guidelines to help you navigate through that. And so today we've got a guest back from a few weeks ago that we've brought back to just talk about what's it like to get started in that new business that you're trying to get started. What are the things that, from a legal standpoint, that you need to navigate through?
This is an important discussion, even though we kind of go into a lot of depth in certain topics. And for some of you all, you may find this to be something that's above your head. That's why we have attorneys. Darshan Kulkarni with the Kulkarni Law Firm, he really knows his stuff. And I think this is a worthwhile discussion. Definitely a podcast that you can't miss. Something I think you'll get a lot out of. So let's take a listen. I think all the times when it comes to actually talking to people who are interested in starting businesses, Dennis, I get questions all the time about, whether it comes from a technology perspective, what are things that we should be doing in terms of, should I work from home? Should I rent an office space out? But inevitably the conversation comes around that involves legal services and, just stuff that goes beyond what I'm capable of being able to talk about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm actually talking to a couple of young people about starting a company. They've already got the LLC, but they haven't talked to an accountant yet. They haven't talked to an attorney yet. I said, those are the two people you need to get involved pretty quickly, just because there's so many things that you may not think about as you're doing your business.
Yep, absolutely. And so obviously when it comes to this type of stuff, we got to bring back the expert here. We got to have somebody who knows the stuff. So Darshan, thanks for coming back today.
Thanks for having me. I didn't realize I get called the expert. I get
worried
when that happens.
Man.
You are the expert. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Listen, I think that, we get asked from time to time, just being, entrepreneurs, inevitably somebody, especially what Dennis is saying, young people who have the question all the time, but anybody they ask a question about, just the basics of it. But a lot of times the conversation leans toward some of the legal things. And that's where I just kind of like, that's, I'm really not the right person to be talking to, but that's something that I wouldn't mind just having like a little bit of an idea of where to direct people, but this probably is a question you get asked all the time, Darshan. I know it has to be, but if I'm thinking about starting a business out and I haven't ever done this before, kind of walk us through some of this. What would you talk to people about? What are things that you mention to them if they're thinking about starting a company?
Yeah, so I guess it really starts off when people reach out to me and go, "Hey, I'm starting a business." I start thinking about, well, first of all, what are you trying to achieve? Is this a lifestyle business or is this a hobby? And the reason that matters is, do you really even need a business? Because you might find out that someone's actually just, I don't know, making pottery and they're going to sell 2 of these every 7 years. Like, you know what? Maybe you don't need to go create a whole structure around this thing. The chances of someone getting hurt or there being real issues, it's pretty low. So maybe a business is not what you need at this moment. Then you have those people who are saying, I'm just starting a business because it's good for my taxes. And then I go, do you really know that's true? Or is this more of, you saw a TikTok video and it told you should set up an LLC? And you get a lot of those people as well. And what you land up with is a lot of those people are like, oh, I actually have my own W-2 job and I work from home, and someone on TikTok told me that I can deduct all of these expenses because I have my own business. No, dude, you're going to sit at your home and do someone else's. You're doing a job.
Yeah.
I talk to your tax expert to find out if you can actually deduct that and if you need an actual business for that. You might find out you don't. Now let's assume the third situation where you're actually starting a business. You're intending to make a profit. You will make a profit. In those scenarios, you absolutely should be looking at starting a business. Now the question is, what does starting a business look like? There are a few different ways to set that up. The first way is you as an individual doing business as. It's where a lot of people start, and that's because it's simple. So Darshan Kulkarni starting as Darshan Kulkarni LLC. You don't usually file paperwork. You're just starting out the business. You don't have an EIN. You don't have anything else. Why are you doing that? Because it's simple. You're going to do a one-off transaction, and you think the risk is very, very low. And you may be right on some of those. You may be wrong on some of those. This is just your dipping your toe in the water to see if this is something you want to explore. I know a lot of people started that way. If you're going to make $50 doing this, maybe you don't need a full business model for it. Okay, you're going to do more than that. It's low risk. You're going to do more than that. Maybe you want to start looking at shielding some level of your risk. Well, what does that shielding look like? There are two different ways to shield. One way to shield is you set up these corporate entities, whether you're talking about an LLC, a C Corp, an S Corp, an LP, PC, blah, blah, blah. I threw out a bunch of abbreviations. We can talk through some of those. Or you get insurance. And the insurance would basically cover you for malpractice. And you can get directors, owners insurance. I'm not an insurance guy, but you can get a variety of insurance to cover your risk. How much insurance you get will always depend on basically the type of risk you're taking. Mm-hmm. So if you're doing major M&A type of deals, $100, $200 million deals, yeah, maybe your $50,000 policy is not as good as you'd want it to be. On the other hand, you're doing a small project. Yeah, you know what? Talk to your insurance company; they'll be able to guide you on what's right for you. But you could then have a company is your next option, and what the company does is it creates this fictional entity, and that's all a company is. It's a fictional entity, and that does the work. And what does that mean? It means that when you strike a deal, this fictional entity is striking a deal with someone else to do work. And you either work for the fictional entity, you own the fictional entity, etc. And now that fictional entity can be a variety of different types of entities. And let's before we get into the variety of different types of entities, why do you want that fictional entity? You create that fictional entity to essentially create a gap between you, the person, and the company that's doing the work. So if something goes wrong, you're very clear. It wasn't Darshan who did the work. It was the company that did the work. You had a contract with the company. So if something goes wrong, you can sue the company. The company can handle whatever they have, but you can't come after me, Darshan. Now, where does it get complicated? This is especially true with startups, especially true even with like small to even medium-sized companies. You'll get this of intermingling of assets, where someone will say, oh, it's my company, but I'm the only owner, so I'm going to land up doing things that results in intermingling. And at that point, the courts, if there's ever a situation like that, will say, were you actually two distinct people or two distinct entities? If you were, then the courts will be very hesitant to hold Darshan responsible for what his company did. On the other hand, if you don't hold that distinction to be true, so you don't have separate bank accounts, you don't have separate credit cards, you intermingle your assets, you all of those types of things, then the court will say you were effectively acting as the company. So you know what, Darshan, you might just be responsible anyways. So that's the first reason you want that gap. Now, I like to do both. I like to have both insurance and have my company as well, just to protect both the company and myself. So that's the first set of thoughts. Your next set of thoughts is, okay, I want to create the entity. What kind of entity do I need? Do I want a corporation? Do I want an LLC? Do I want a partnership? Depending on, and this is where you start getting your lawyers involved. And I'm not sure it's necessarily even an accountant this second, it'd be a lawyer. But they should be working with your accountant as well. Um, Depending on what you're going to do, if the number of people who are involved, the types of people that are involved. So, for example, international investors versus US investors, 100 investors versus 2 investors. All of that plays a role. If it's like 2 investors, you may say a partnership is best. If it's 100 investors, maybe a C Corp is best. Maybe an LLC is best. Are you looking at investors you don't know? In which case, um, a C Corp may be best. But you cannot do, for example, an S Corp because there are limits to that. So this is where you start getting into the type of entity. The next question I go is, okay, so I've determined what type of entity I want to have. Why do I want that type? Again, there are tax implications to each one of those. So a C Corp, for example, has what's called double taxation. But an S Corp lets you have what's called pass-through taxation. And again, I'm not a tax law expert, but the idea would be there are advantages to each one. You can also have a professional corporation. Some states, for example, will insist that doctors' offices or lawyers' offices be a PC, a professional corporation. So what is right for you is something else you've got to figure out. Once you get past all of that, where do you register? Everyone seems to go, oh, I work out of Pennsylvania, I work out of New Jersey, I work out of Massachusetts. I'm just going to register there. And that may very well be fine. However, when you're doing this more strategically, you might say, you know what? If I had to choose the law, I know Delaware law is pretty established. Delaware law is very clear. It tends to favor the company more than not. I will take Delaware law. But if you, for example, live in Pennsylvania and have a Delaware corporation, you may still need to take your Delaware corporation and register in Pennsylvania as a foreign company doing business in that state.
Yep. Yeah. I'm working with one right now. He's in Texas, and he went
Yeah.
ahead and registered in Texas. And I said, maybe I'll be wrong, but most of the people I've worked with register in Delaware because one, it's definitely more favorable. It's very low cost to get an LLC in Delaware and maintain that LLC. So there's been, and this is where people sometimes just jump and go and don't sit there and talk to experts or people that have knowledge of why you should do one thing or the other.
So the funny thing is, Texas is another one of the states that people are now starting to see more interest in, because Delaware is so well established that people argue that, you know what, it doesn't give me the flexibility I want. So people are starting to like Texas, for example. Another state, if you're looking at like trusts, for example, or sort of holding companies, people like Wyoming, for example. Nevada is another good state that people will look at. So people from the West Coast tend to focus on like a Nevada or a Wyoming. Because you don't have to name certain people you don't have to name the holders in certain corporations for Wyoming. Delaware is a little bit more onerous. For example, recently Tesla had this problem where Elon Musk said that I want to be paid XYZ, and the Delaware court said no, you can't be, and he was subject to the Delaware courts. So he's considering moving Tesla to Texas because he thinks he can get better flexibility in Texas than in Delaware. So it's all give and take. It's all unique to your situation, because chances are most of us are not saying I want $40 billion as payment, but he is.
So kind of to recap here. So, I mean, you've got to decide, hey, what type of entity you're going to be, LLC, corporation, all those types of things. Also think about where you're going to establish that. And there's pros and cons on all those. And then the risk piece of, hey, do you even pull in insurance risk in this thing? Because the LLC in my case, the LLC helps protect, but there's things we do that I've even got the insurance, because that way, if they come back, it's not even hitting the business per se. It's going through the insurance carrier to cover anything. And, knock on wood, we've been doing it for 13 years, never had a claim, but it's there. It's a safety net for you, and
Right.
There's a cost to it, but it's worth having because it allows you to sleep a little bit at night, knowing that if someone is not happy with something and decides to sue, that you've got that safety net and you've got an attorney that you work with that can help you navigate through all those things.
Absolutely. So once you finish all of that, then you start thinking about, okay, I now need to tell people I exist. This fictional entity you've created, he or she needs a social security number. That's your EIN.
Yep.
And that means you go you can actually use professional like registration companies, and they'll do all of this for you. But you can do this stuff for free as well.
Hmm.
An EIN is for free. You just call the federal government and they'll give it to you. It's not hard. It's not that hard. And there are companies that'll do all of this for you, which is simple. Now, when you talk, for example, about working from home, which a lot of companies are liking, especially post-COVID, everyone's going, you know what? I have an employee sitting in California. I have one sitting in Indiana, and I have one sitting in Texas. But I actually work out of my Pennsylvania office. Well, you might need to register in every one of those states as you're doing business in those states, because you actually are doing business in those
Yep.
states. You might be a food manufacturer, and you might need to register not only as a corporation doing business in that state, but also as a food manufacturer who's selling products in that state, which are two separate registrations with two separate organizations within the government. You might have a situation where you're saying, I am going to call myself, and this actually happens, which is why I think it's funny. There's a company if you drive down Broad Street in Philadelphia, there is actually was last time I looked, a car dealership called Best Buy, and I drive past them all the time. I laugh. So I imagine they know about the big other Best Buy. They're choosing to leverage that. But my point is, do you have any intellectual property concerns? Should you register that trademark? If you're a big Best Buy, you may go one of two ways. One is this really a issue I want to get with? Some car dealership on the middle of Broad Street in Philadelphia. What is the likelihood that I'm concerned? Maybe pretty low. It's not the thing I want to deal with. On the other hand, the only way to protect your trademark is to actually police it. So if enough people start using your trademark, it can get what's called genericized, which means that you could have Xerox, for example, where you used to photocopy things. Xerox got genericized. So Xerox, the company, cannot actually police that word anymore because they failed to protect it.
Interesting.
So it got genericized. So in the same way, if Best Buy doesn't police the use of their name, they might lose access to it, which is why you see those letters. And people come out saying, oh, I can't believe you, big company, are picking on the little guy. Well, they might have to. Otherwise, they lose rights to their own name. Right. One of my favorite ones that went all the way to the Supreme Court was a company called, and wait for it, Victor's Little Secret. And and it was for adult toys. And obviously Victoria's Secret had a problem with it. And they argued what's called dilution, saying that even if people can tell it's different, it's diluting our trademark. And that reduces the value in our brand name. And the guy took it all the way to the Supreme Court and lost, if I remember correctly. But that's why intellectual property needs to be protected. If you're dealing with, for example, drugs or devices, you might have to be dealing with licensing arrangements with universities or the like, and that needs to be managed. But this sort of gives you a general feel of some of the issues I get into with clients.
Well, and I also, like Benny and I both are in technology, and I know a lot of our listeners are in technology. That's another one you have to get that documented, because in my case, I own the software, but the content or the data is theirs. And so, it's documenting and having that all laid out. So, because sometimes people think, oh, I want to own the data, but I also want to own the system. Well, you don't own my system. You're not paying me that much money to have access to my system. You have access to it, but you don't own the system, but you do own the data that you put into it. And having that, and then the intellectual property, because a lot of them are like, you can't use that formula again. Well, yeah, I can, because it's a general formula. It's A plus B equals C. You can't restrict me but I can't copy your exact stuff into another instance or a situation that we're doing. So there's lots of things. And again, that's where attorneys come in. And if you're trying to start that business, you're always gung-ho, let's go. But there's reasons why you have an attorney and an accountant get involved to protect it. The other big one that I run into a lot with people, and I was guilty of it when I started, you're bringing in this money, you're used to a W-2 where they take taxes out. if you don't remember to take the taxes out, I encourage people to set up a separate bank account and just put that money in there weekly, monthly, however you're going to do it, because Uncle Sam is going to get his fair share of whatever the proceeds are. And,
Hmm.
and if you're not paying them quarterly, that's a real problem. And then, Uncle Sam is they're not very gracious of saying, oh, I'll give you a year to wait for you to pay for it. They want their money now. So, that's why that tax account plays into it so much, because there's things you can do legally to make sure you're not paying taxes or as much tax as you need to. But you've got to plan for that. And so many people in that first year forget that part.
So I would say you actually raised a couple of things, little tidbits for your audience, since you said there's a lot of tech people in there. I do a lot of work with health tech companies, and you're very clear, for example, that you do need to protect, for example, your actual IP in the
Yeah.
software, which you might have a copyright claim on or the like. So you would usually give a license to that. So you don't own the actual product. You have a license that you may be able to even terminate. And there have been cases on exactly that. So talk to a lawyer to see exactly how that license agreement needs to be written up. Because there were situations, for example, where I think it was Amazon that gave books to everyone, and then when the service shut down, everyone lost access to those books. They said, I bought the book. Nope, you bought a license to those books. And that becomes a concern. So question is, what are they actually buying? People want clarity. The second thing, I do a lot of, like I said, with health tech companies, you might own data in many cases in other industries, but you may not be able to own patient data or consumer data.
Mm.
And there are a variety of laws that go into it, whether we're talking about HIPAA, which a lot of people know about but misunderstand, because HIPAA doesn't apply in every situation just because there is an individual's health information in there. You might have FTC laws, et cetera, that kick in, but you, generally speaking, HIPAA applies in very, very specific situations. The next piece is you have state level laws. California has some of the most onerous ones, whether we're talking about CCPA, CPRA, which really goes to just data on individuals. They have their own unique laws, and California, I'm picking on them, but various states have versions of this. They might have their own unique laws on health. So, for example, Florida has laws on obesity data. So, if you are getting some help for, using the Ozempic or the like, in those situations, what they're finding out is that data has to be protected in special ways because Florida calls out obesity. AIDS might be a situation like that as well. If you have AIDS or HIV, certain states will say that data is confidential. STDs, that data is confidential. So you have to worry about each of those things, and that data has to be handled separately. If you're marketing, for example, there are both state and federal laws that kick into it. Things like what's called TCPA, which really goes to texting. You've got do not call registries. You've got there's a texting. Email can spam is another one, which goes to sort of emailing. Each of those has to be adhered to as well. And here's the interesting part: sometimes people will send out emails to potential clients and then find out that, oh, person X opened up the email, so I should send a second email to them because they did that. Well, if you agree to do that, if they did not agree to do that, you may be in violation of, and get this, state wiretapping laws,
Wow.
because they didn't consent to that type of situation. So that's surprising to a lot of people. I would also say that one of the things you raised there, Dennis, is this idea that people might have a W-2. Well, I've seen a lot of new startups go, everyone's a 1099. And you need to understand, when is someone a 1099 versus when is someone a W-2. California really was onerous about it. And they said that if you work in an Uber, you're now an employee. Whether or not you want that flexibility is irrelevant. We're now an employee. Well, that caused a lot of friction, but that's still where we are, as far as I know. But so keep track. The federal, the IRS is very, very specific about that as well, and there are regulations on what constitutes a W-2 versus a 1099.
Yeah, and there's certain things you can and can't do a 1099 versus the W-2, and there's pros and cons. But and that's where the accountant person and even an HR person comes in on that one to help you because there's many people I've come across that they call them 1099s. I'm like, those are employees. I mean, you're managing them, you're telling them what to do. I said 1099s are truly independent contractors that have basically kind of have their own business that are providing a service to you, but you can't tell them and you can't schedule them and all that kind of stuff. So
You can't tell them to show up at 9 a.m, take a break at 1 p.m, and then leave at 5
right,
p.m. every single
right,
day.
exactly. So there's lots of things. So, that's why we wanted to have you on today. There's just lots of things, there's lots of people starting new businesses and they're always gung ho ready to go, but there's guide rails along the way to help you be successful to get there, but you've got to stay within the guardrails. And that's where attorneys, accountants, HR experts play in to kind of give you those advice. And it doesn't have to be a huge effort it's just some conversation, some dialogue, pulling those people in along the way as you're getting going.
Darshan, this is a lot of information, and truly, what he's covered here, there's so much going and important for the rest of our lives for sure. I certainly know that with counsel, I've been able to make some better decisions for my business. And I know that can be people who need the same type of counsel for them if they're thinking about starting a business. Darshan, what's the best way for people to be able to get a hold of you?
So a few different ways. First one would be just calling me, 302-252-6959. You could also email me, Darshan at kulkarnilawfirm.com. That's DARSHAN at KULKARNI lawfirm.com. Or you should just find me on LinkedIn. I'm Darshan Kulkarni. As far as I know, I'm one of the few ones out there. But you'd be surprised how many there are.
You're not the only Darshan for sure.
I'm definitely not the only Darshan.
Yeah.
I'm also not the only Darshan Kulkarni, surprisingly.
But Darshan Kulkarni from the Kulkarni Law Firm. And so I think you're the only one of those for sure.
Yes.
But listen, Darshan, thank you so much for stopping by today. This has been super helpful.
Yeah, just
is something that's a must for anyone out there thinking about starting a business. Absolutely.
Yeah, Darshan, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Dennis, that's another podcast in the can. I know that a lot of you all want to know how to get in touch with us. Dennis, what's the best way for folks to be able to get a hold of you?
Yeah, email's by far the best for me. It's Dennis J, so DENNISJ at worksolution.com, and that's WORX solution, no S at the end, so solution.com. Benny, how about you?
Yeah, same thing. Get a hold of me. My email address is benny@velocitytechnology.group. That's BENNY at velocitytechnology.group. Also, for me and Dennis, you can find us on LinkedIn. Look for us on LinkedIn. Our Work From Home with Two Guys is on LinkedIn. And we also have a website, WFH2guys.com. Look us up. You'll find all the past episodes and some little bits of information that maybe we don't get a chance to talk to on the podcast. We put it out there too as well.
And definitely share us with your friends and people in your network.
Absolutely. Let us know what we can do to make this podcast your podcast. Give us some ideas. If you'd like to be a guest, let us know. We'll talk to you guys soon.
You've been listening to WFH with Two Guys. We'll see you next time.